Recorded. I hope that's okay with everybody. You can turn your camera off if you're not okay with that.
There might be a way for you to not have those closed caption things.
There's no
So-
like box where I can click X, to X out or move. I can't even move the box. It's kind of annoying. Anyway, so here's what I thought today that might be helpful in understanding Neo-Hasidism. I think the Baal Shem Tov was like a Buddha, like an enlightened being. Like there probably are a few enlightened beings throughout Jewish history, but I think he was exceptional. And so it's like the Buddhists, they all associate with him, with the Buddha, and they trace their teachings to him, and they seek to emulate him. And I think that's kind of what's happening with Neo-Hasidism, but it's a completely different framework. But somehow we connect with and relate to the Baal Shem Tov and what he embodied. I think the values and the energy and the connection to God and the devotional qualities, so many different qualities that are an expression of his living Judaism, his embodiment of this certain energy that's hard to define. How does that idea resonate with y'all? Vaughn.
Well, this reminds me of what's happened with Christianity in that Jesus was, I think, another enlightened being that started in Judaism, but he went off on a tangent. And nowadays there are fundamentalists who are trying to get back to his original teachings and his way of being in the world. Unfortunately, fundamentalism then freezes and becomes really strict, and it sounds kind of like what's happened with Hasidism and Neo-Hasidism, where people are trying to get back to the Baal Shem Tov, his actual words and his way of getting right with God and everything.
Mm-hmm. It does say a lot about religion. I think the dynamics that you mentioned with Christianity are at play in the whole dynamic of Judaism and how it developed. And Hasidism started out as a radical and liberal departure from the traditional modalities of Judaism at that time. And now look, it's like almost completely reversed now. It became very ultra-Orthodox. Any other similar observations? You were going to say something?
I would like to start with knowing more about the Baal Shem Tov. Do we have, is there any writings about his life and how he, came to be who he came to be?
Yes.
And and
Let me address that
Okay.
in a few minutes. And I'll mention that, teaching this class on Neo-Hasidism might have been, a little ambitious, given that folks may not know a whole lot about Hasidism to begin with.
Right.
So that's a really good place to start.
Yeah.
All right. He was born in 1700. Some say 1698, but thereabouts. And he died around 1760. So he was relatively young.
Yeah.
He was in the area that's now known as Ukraine, in the Carpathian Mountains. And he was a peasant of sorts, and he was an actual historical figure. There is documentation to prove that he actually did exist. He wasn't well known in his youth. He came, the legend says that it wasn't until he was like 36 that he became known. Because up until that time, he must have been studying Kabbalah on his own, or maybe with some teachers, but very little, if anything, is known about him, except that he would walk children to school. He wasn't even a teacher. He would escort the children to school and escort them home. And some also say that he dug clay and sold it to brick makers. So he was pretty poor. But what we do know that is documented is he did become known as a respected rabbi in his community. He didn't write very much. He wrote a few letters and maybe a document or two, but he was recorded in the tax journals of his city. He was exempt from a few taxes because he was committed to public service, and he was, known as maybe, I don't know, he might have had a few rabbinic roles in his community, but he was primarily a Baal Shem. Have you ever? Okay, I'll tell you what that is. Baal, B-A-A-L, means master, and Shem means name. And so it was understood then that someone who was a Baal Shem was like a folk healer. And his primary means, besides using herbs, was amulets. And usually that meant like having a parchment or something, and you'd write God's name on it or some other divine name, because letters and names had special power. And he would roll it up and put it in some kind of amulet. I think a mezuzah on the door is very similar to that. Sometimes mothers would hang them over their babies' cribs. And so he was pretty well known. And that was pretty common for there to be people, they were like itinerant preachers and healers, folk healers in Eastern Europe, known as Baalei Shem. That's the plural form. But he became known as the Baal Shem Tov. And that title, that name is somewhat ambiguous because it could mean the master of the good name or the good master of the name, distinguishing him from all the other Baalei Shem. So, and not only did he become known as the good Baal Shem, but there are hundreds, if not thousands, of stories about him. Some of them might just be legends, but there's some basis in truth there. He seemed to have had maybe psychic powers, could tell what people were thinking, and had a certain kind of energy that you've read about that, the people who come to see the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and they say when he looks at you, it's like you're the only person in the world, even though he knows millions of people. So some people have that quality, and he definitely had it. And he attracted not only simple peasants, but also very learned rabbis, many who were very skeptical to begin with. And he won them over as disciples and friends. And he had no intention of starting a movement, but he somehow was able to assimilate all the teachings from the Kabbalah and embody them and just radiate that as a form of energy and knowledge and just compassion. And so he developed a large following, and after he died, it wasn't until then that his teachings, actually people didn't start writing down his teachings until like 20 years after he died, which is remarkable. So, but he had a couple of, like his primary teacher, his successor was Dov Ber, the Maggid of Mezrich, and he was a very dark and gloomy Rebbe, but there were some other students that came along that had a different flavor, different focus. And so there were like 4 really well-known teachers of his that went out and spread his teachings to their students, and it spread like fire throughout Eastern Europe. And then it was almost decimated in the Holocaust until quite a few of them emigrated to Israel, to South Africa, to America, and several Hasidic sects grew and flourished and to what we know today. But it's very different from its original teachings. Does that answer some of your questions?
Yeah, but so really we know about him through other people's, it's sort of like Jesus in that sense, you know, in that,
That's right.
yeah.
Yeah, the four disciples, the Gospels.
Took it all. So
All right.
Reb Zalman
Enough.
wrote a book about Baal Shem Tov called Hearts of Fire. It's also on my list. I'll have to fill it
Great.
At some point.
So Reb, I have a question about something you just said.
Yeah.
You made a statement that how different it is today from what it was originally. I said, so could you be more specific about that? I mean, the little I know about Hasidic is in what I see in New York is certainly not what you're talking about. Is that
That's right.
That
That's
what
right. I've pondered this for decades and can't entirely put my finger on it, but somehow the teachings in their, I think what happened was that his closest, most devoted disciples adopted a very traditional approach, and they associated all the customs of his day, of 18th century Poland or Ukraine, with with their Rebbe or with their Rebbes. And so it's hard for them to separate out the essence from all the trappings, the clothing.
Yeah.
They speak in Yiddish, they live in very patriarchal societies, and they understand the Torah to be meant literally. And so they've adopted a very orthodox approach. And they have the fire in them. There's some kind of fire, but it's encrusted, you might say, in this very very archaic, structured ways of thinking. So that's what Neo-Hasidism is. It attempts to liberate the spark, the energy from, that he brought into the world, liberating it from all the trappings and the
Organization. I mean, I was saying the other day, that famous saying, that if you want to destroy truth, build an organization around it. And so it's that idea of getting into the trappings rather than the essence.
That's right.
And that's what's turned me off to Judaism. But this is an interesting, sort of coming back.
It is a coming back. And that's the experience of a lot of spiritual seekers like myself and many others who left Judaism and came back. And it was mostly because of these teachings I could connect with. The rest of Judaism, like you were describing before, Philip, it's like it didn't do it for me.
Yeah.
It wasn't until I discovered what I call Jewish spirituality that really saved Judaism for me, and I think that's the case for thousands of other seekers.
Yeah, that's pretty much what Steve and I just talked a lot about, is how you, when there's a pure idea, it's wonderful, it's beautiful. And then when you get into, as she said, the organization, then rules start to come in. And then if I don't happen to like your rules, now I'm going to jump over here and make my own group, and I'm going to bring in some different rules, and pretty soon the essence might be at the basis of it, but it's really gone.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of describing Neo-Hasidism, it might be easier to describe it by what it's not.
Yes.
because what it is, it's so spread out, and you find traces of it in so many different books and teachings and teachers that it's hard to come up with any kind of well-defined boundary as to what it is and what it isn't. So let me just share. So I have a great respect for many of the teachers and rabbis who have engaged with Hasidism one way or another. And I think Hillel Zeitlin and Martin Buber and Heschel are some of the pioneers that really brought it into the Western world. That I think it's we were to, you can read any of these books and enjoy and appreciate them, but if you really want to understand and trace how it came forth, or where the influences that helped it come to light, I think it's really important to be familiar, at least with these early teachers of Neo-Hasidism. So let me say, and then a little bit later, I'd like to tell you a story, because I promised to tell a Hasidic story.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's begin with Hillel Zeitlin. Some of you read the chapter on him.
Yeah.
And as tragic as that is, right? I mean, a brilliant guy,
Yes.
exposed to the university and philosophy, and he was brilliant. But he was really attracted to something in Hasidism, and he became religious in his lifetime. And he became like a light of salvation to many of the Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto right up until the end in the Holocaust. Did you read that heartbreaking story
Yeah.
from one of his students who remembers the time when he was
Just before,
was in a
when he went to visit him.
yeah, he was in a gathering. I think it might be worth reading. I'm going to read just a couple pages from the book, pages 12, 13, and 14. Because this doesn't say a whole lot about his teachings, and you can read them. And he was a prolific writer, and much of what he wrote is in here. It's excellent. It's really great.
Can we get the 14? It's 14, right? 14,
Yeah.
The 14 points.
What is it? The 14 admonitions.
They're there.
Yeah, that's right. All right, so let me read this story. This is from somebody, let's see, his name was Simcha Bunim Urbach, a disciple of Zeitlin's who survived the war. He recalled this event before the Warsaw Ghetto was liquidated. This happened 2 months before the calamity, 2 months before the outbreak of the war. As one of his disciples who frequented his house, I was called to Zeitlin's abode for a special gathering. On the invitation slip was inscribed, "This relates to the very existence of the people of Israel." Wow. I mean, think about the elections, coming up and how, really important at a what do you call that, an inflection point. Very much surprised by these words, I came to his home. There I beheld a sight that was quite extraordinary, even for me. My surprise was to increase manyfold. Zeitlin was seated at a table, and there was a group of 10 people around him. They included the religious writer and legendary figure Isaac Israel Stern, well-known Kabbalists from Warsaw, and a few Bratslaver Hasidim. In a hushed voice, both deep and warm, suffused with quiet pathos, in the tenor of a seer of visions, and looking like a man who is not present, Zeitlin said to us, "My beloveds, I behold a great catastrophe before me. It is growing nearer and creeping to the gates of the state of Poland. The Nazi enemy is approaching, and it will, heaven forfend, totally destroy the Jewish community on the banks of the Vistula. It will move from city to city, from town to town, from community to community, and it will slaughter us. It will tear off the heads of elders, smash the skulls of children, and destroy us all, leaving behind no survivors or remnants." A heavy silence reigned following his words. Suddenly Stern arose, shaken and pierced, and asked with passion, What must we do to avert this evil?" And Zeitlin said, "I see no other way except to pray, and to pray once more." It goes on, and then the last words of that section says, they say, Zeitlin died in the course of the forced march to Treblinka on the eve of Rosh Hashanah, 1942. Yeah. So these teachings, I mean, they're woven into Jewish history and into the history of the Holocaust, and just with such depth and such pain and passion. That's a part of the teachings of the history of these teachings. Any comments, observations before we move on to Buber and anything else about Zeitlin that struck you?
Only the somewhat satiric comment that the praying didn't work.
Right. That's what I was going to say. Is there any answer to that? We know that the prayer didn't stop it. Does Neo-Hasidism or Hasidism ever address, or anyone in it address, how that praying basically didn't work?
Well, it didn't work as a question mark, right? Because we can say that we're still here, the Jewish people are still here, the Jewish people survived, Judaism survives, and that this has happened again and again and again in our history. So, that's the question. What do we mean by working? It didn't work for, obviously, for him to survive that situation, but maybe praying was not about whether it's going to work out, but praying is the way inward, and that's the only way there is, like that's maybe the, so I don't know. It's just, yeah.
I couldn't agree with
And I believe that that's the fallacy of prayer, is that
I,
I was raised to believe what you pray for, you're looking for the answer. And the answer isn't what I'm asking for. The answer sometimes is more inward, as you said, or it's on a much broader scale. And it doesn't happen, the answer doesn't come today. It can come as we reflect back on history in days, in years, in time.
Yeah.
yeah,
Avinoam, you're going to say
it
something.
completely depends on what the intention of prayer is, right? So
Right, exactly.
if you are, I mean, when we're children, we're taught, okay, ask God what you want for and he'll give it to you, right? But we're like adults and, we're thinking people. And the idea that, in the Shoah, in the Holocaust, that the prayer didn't work, right? Well, when you're praying, hopefully, when I pray, you're not trying to affect something. You're inviting yourself to connect with something greater than yourself. And at a time of tremendous despair, sometimes prayer is the only thing that helps, but it doesn't affect outcome.
Right.
It helps you come to terms with the situation. So
Doesn't sound like what he's saying in the quote, as as you hear it. To me, it sounds like he's actually is looking for an outcome.
But maybe,
But maybe that's just the
maybe it did
memory.
work though. Maybe 60 years later, all of us sitting at a table reading, maybe the fact that those pamphlets that he printed up somehow survived and somehow got a ball rolling. Maybe it did work.
Exactly.
I was gonna say that at the same time as he was praying, other Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto were revolting. They were either preparing or they were already fighting against the Nazis, and that didn't work either.
Right.
Nor did the revolt of the other Poles who revolted. But at the same time, I was thinking like you, Greg, that there were some survivors. There is testimony. We do remember those people who were in the Warsaw Ghetto and
Right.
elsewhere during the Shoah.
Mhm.
And we keep them alive.
And yeah, we keep them alive in our memories.
Yeah. I think the outcome is yet to be known. And I think prayer has something to do with transforming our consciousness. And that's always a work in progress.
Well, there's like the three things, right, to connect you. One is prayer. The other, what were the others? Was three
Tshuva.
things?
Mm.
Tshuva, repentance, or turning back.
And tzedakah.
Tzedakah, giving
Right.
charity
Right.
and more
Right.
widely doing justice.
that can get you out of the book of death and into the
Right.
The service, kind of
Yeah.
the idea of
Yeah.
service,
That's right.
prayer,
All right.
those three things reverse
and the Torah. That was the other thing.
Tshuva, tefillah, and stuff.
Mm,
And the Torah.
okay,
Yeah.
maybe.
Well,
It's all
no, I mean in
connected.
terms of
Yeah.
the writing.
Oh, you mean his 14 things?
Well, not the 14.
oh,
There
okay.
was like in that chapter that you sent us. In there is like the three things that connect you.
Torah, Israel, and there was something, and God,
like-
Torah, and Israel.
And
Yeah,
prayer
Yeah.
and praying.
Yeah.
Like precepts
Yeah.
to the Yavna society. The people they have to
yeah.
believe within the society. We have to love Israel. We have to study Torah. We have to
You have to
pray.
love fellow
Pray.
Jews.
You have to
Yeah.
pray.
And
Those were
all
the things.
Jews, right?
All
All
Jews, yeah.
All Israel, yeah.
I wanted to ask you, Erica, you mentioned that you spent time
Shlomo.
with Chabad, and if you feel like there's stuff that you would take out of Hasidism today that you find valuable.
Did you get that, Erica?
I barely. It's hard to hear the people around the
Yeah.
table, but I think what she said is I did spend a lot of time with Chabad. It was a long time ago. I lived with them and worked with them, and ultimately decided not to, sort of adopt the lifestyle, so to speak. But
Is it something you questioned at the time? Like, is this possibly?
yes, I mean, I think, I was very young, and it was a very attractive community. They were wonderful to me. It's all absolutely wonderful memories. Everybody was very loving, very kind. I don't know if you all remember, but there was a time, and I'm not sure if they do it anymore, but in Los Angeles, Chabad every year would put on a big telethon, which would raise money for their programs. And their programs were not just for Jewish people, but for the community. They helped drug addicts and alcoholics to get on their feet and get jobs. They helped homeless people. They had all kinds of programs, and they had a telethon every year. And I helped them to produce the telethon, but I also lived with them. And it was an amazing experience. I later went to London and lived with a family in London as well. And I mean, I could just go on and on about how amazing and wonderful it was. And I think that they would have liked it had I gone on to, sort of join the community and get more learning and become Lubavitch. And I did not ultimately choose to do that. But I think what Vaughn is referring to, because we talked a little bit about this, is that I was very attracted to it. And I think the thing that attracted me, the few things that attracted me the most are, number one, that incredible sense of community. I mean, they really loved each other and took care of each other, and nobody fell through the cracks. Nobody. Whereas I feel like in our society today, just in general, a lot of people fall through the cracks, and they did not allow people to fall through the cracks, which was a very supportive place. And the other thing is that they had a joy about them. I understand that Chabad and Lubavitch is very controversial to some people, and I do understand some reasons why. But I'm talking about the good things. And one of the really good things is that they had a joy about them. There was a sort of, I don't know how to explain it. It was a joie de vivre. It was a love of life and a love of Judaism and God and a sense of purpose that was extremely attractive. And they had a deep belief that, yes, I do wish that I could have more of that, or I had more of that. And Rabbi, am I correct in saying that Neo-Hasidism, and maybe I'm misunderstanding it, but that Neo-Hasidism is sort of trying to capture that joy, that devotion, that just sort of love of being, love of life, love of Judaism, without sort of the trappings, so to speak, of the lifestyle that make it a little bit harder to live that in our modern world. Am I understanding that correctly?
Erica, that is absolutely correct. And for you who was saying that I think I'm behind everybody else, you totally nailed it right there. So thank you for that.
Well, I mean, I think that's one reason I'm here and it's taken me a lot of years, but I mean, they do have something that
Right.
I don't see like it in a lot of other groups, right? And I would love to have that. But for me, as a young woman, it was difficult for me to say, okay, I'm gonna. It is a certain, lots of things in their lifestyle that just weren't they weren't something I thought I could do for the rest of my life.
Well, that was my experience when I was a college student. I went to college for my first 2 years at Drew University in New Jersey, and a couple of weekends. Well, the Chabadniks came onto campus and invited me to a Shabbat, and Madison, New Jersey was very close to Morristown, where there was a huge Chabad yeshiva. So I
Right.
spent a few times there, and I went for one weekend into Crown Heights to see the
Mhm.
Rebbe
Right.
and stayed with a Chabad family. And I remembered being so inspired and like so much wanting that, but I couldn't bring myself to accept all the other things that came with it.
Right.
And so I think my lifetime goal has been to try to recreate that, or to find a community in which that was possible.
Well, and then you just said it very eloquently, because I feel that. I mean, I must say that every once in a while I wonder whether I made the wrong decision. But it's a long, long time ago, and I doubt that, because I don't know that I would have made it long term in that lifestyle. But there are some things about it that are enormously attractive. So that's interesting that you
Absolutely.
also had that kind of experience.
Yeah, well, I think you're in good company, because I think a lot of us around the table here feel that way, but also the people who wrote the books that are on my table felt that way.
Right.
Zeitlin and Martin Buber. God, I mean, we could spend another hour talking about Martin Buber. And I want to just I'll send you a link to a video. I think this class is going to go over. We're not going to end at 8 o'clock, I'm afraid, but you can stay as long as you want. I'll plan to finish up when I tell my story, I'll finish up by 8:15. But let me spend a few minutes on Buber, and I'll send you a link to a video that I wanted us to watch at least a little bit of. Let's see. So Paul Mendez-Flor, who is a great scholar of Judaism and Jewish mysticism, was being interviewed by one of the guys from Seekers of Unity. So let me share this with you right there. Boom. And we'll watch just a couple of minutes. He's telling a story about Buber.
Then he tells the following story. During the First World War, in 1916, he was visited by a bedraggled soldier, marched from, he's claimed, for weeks to visit the great teacher of mysticism, Martin Buber. He knocked on the door at 6 o'clock in the morning, when Buber was already at his study. And you just don't do that, obviously. Certainly in Germany, where everything is very formal. And he said, I have to speak to you. Buber said, well, certainly. But Buber didn't realize the man was in great stress. And he said, well, come in. Perhaps we can have a half-hour discussion. And the man asked questions. And Buber said he cordially responded to each of the questions. And the following day, he learned that the man had committed suicide because he failed to see the questions that were really inscribed in the furrows of his forehead, as opposed to simply being spoken. And he realized that the mysticism, which takes us out of the troubled world we live in, we somehow neglect the troubles that really characterize that world. So he went through a process of reconsidering the mystical, at least to ground it in what he would call the everyday.
So he's talking about a transformation that Buber went through after this incident. He was a great scholar, brilliant scholar, and also wrote a great deal about mysticism and about Hasidism, wrote many of the stories. You'll see some of the essays he wrote in our book. But then he went through this transformation, and he was saying that mysticism can take us out of the world, but he felt that it was missing that element to be able to connect with what was going on in the world, and the pain that this person had that he failed to respond to. And that's when his writings turned from mysticism to what we might call relational Judaism, which he ended up crystallizing in his book, his most famous book, I and Thou, which is a difficult book. And we could go get into it, and it would take another hour to really explain that, because it's a very, abstract kind of a concept, but it really gets at the root of mysticism and of Hasidism. But it was much more popular in non-Jewish circles. And so his influence in Judaism was kind of mixed.
Right. Yeah.
That can be your next class.
Yeah, Buber.
Uber.
Okay. Now then we can talk about Heschel. Now Heschel came from a Hasidic family, many generations, brilliant. I think when he was a kid, he would 5 years old, he'd stand on the table and give Divrei Torah, and all the rabbis would listen to him. But he studied at a university and learned about secular, studies and science and psychology and everything. And
What's his time frame?
Heschel, I'm guessing he was born probably maybe in the late 19th century and died in the maybe 1970s, maybe.
He was instrumental in the civil rights movement, so
Yes.
that's kind of the height of his career.
That's true.
So
That's true.
he would be really a contemporary, though, of what's his name? Zeitler.
Not so
No,
much
no,
Zeitler, but Buber. Buber,
Buber,
yeah, he knew.
okay.
I think he was a little younger than Buber, actually. Somebody can look it up on Wikipedia and tell us all.
Okay.
But I want to show you a brief video of him in an interview, and you'll get a sense of his character. Let's see, where's the share button? I think I have to do this to find it. Share, here it is. Okay, we'll do this. Maybe we'll do desktop so I can be sure to catch it. Got to get rid of that.
Looks like he was born in 1907.
1907?
Yeah.
Okay, here it is. All right, so this was the Eternal Light interview with Abraham Joshua Heschel, a 3.5-minute clip.
Often vigorous discussion was employed to clarify spiritual concepts. But the focal point of much of these discussions was moral issues, as seen in one of the Eternal Light's most memorable programs. News correspondent Carl Stern's interview with Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, an interview that Heschel never saw, as he died shortly before its airing.
When I first met him, when I first got to say hello to him, and I had never met him before, my first thought was, this is Mark Twain with a yarmulke.
I brought these books from home. They're only a small portion of the books you've written. What was there in your life, especially your early life, that would give you the thoughts to fill so many books?
Hard work, training, and a good environment. I was very fortunate in having lived as a child and as a young boy in an environment where there were many people I could revere, people concerned with problems of inner life, of spirituality, of integrity.
And I remember saying to him, and this may have been before the cameras were even rolling, wouldn't it be great if we had no problems? And he said, when you have no problems, you're dead.
Let me give you a dramatic, fictitious picture. Here stands a man, and I'll tell you, this is a man who has no problems. Do you know why? He's an idiot. Because a man has problems. And the more complicated, the richer he is, the deeper are his problems. This is our distinction: to have problems, to face problems. Life is a challenge, not just a satisfaction. And the calamity of our time is to reduce life to pleasure only. I'm not against pleasure, but the greatness of life is experience and facing a challenge rather than just having satisfaction. I would be frightened if I were to be ruled by a person who is satisfied, who has the answers to everything.
If God were to control every aspect of man's life, it would not be living. Then that raises the question, why pray to God then? If God is not going to interfere, if God is not going to intervene, if God is not going to help, what is the role of prayer?
First of all, let us not misunderstand the nature of prayer, particularly in Jewish tradition. The primary purpose of prayer is not to make requests. The primary purpose of prayer is to praise, to sing, to chant. Because the essence of prayer is a song, and men cannot live without a song. Prayer may not save us, but prayer may make us worthy of being saved. God is the meaning beyond absurdity.
If I recall correctly, in the first week or 10 days. I think they got like 65,000 requests for the transcript, and ultimately I think it went perhaps to 250,000. They had never received that volume of transcript requests. I've been associated with a few things that interested the public in my lifetime. I covered the Watergate trials and the Patty Hearst trial and all that kind of stuff. But I would say I got more mail and more response from this interview than anything else I've ever done.
Wow. Okay. So, pretty powerful. Yeah, we could spend a whole. Actually, we did do like a series on Heschel, didn't we?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I can't remember how many sessions it was. I'll mention that in his, I think it was his doctoral dissertation, he wrote on the prophets, and it was later published as a 2-volume book, and it's huge and very dense and hard. We were going to read that together. But anyway, he was profoundly influenced by the prophets, which I think is why he became known as like a civil rights leader and marched with Martin Luther King, and was just a towering figure in Jewish thought, and a prolific writer and an inspiration to just thousands of people in the 60s and after. His daughter, Susanna, is a professor, I think, of philosophy or religious studies at Dartmouth, and has always something to say about him. I think she wrote the foreword.
The foreword is this.
Yeah.
She talks about her
And as a matter of fact, I gotta mention, there's another rabbi who just passed away maybe 2 months ago, named Rabbi Bert Jacobson from the East Bay. Anyone know him?
No.
He was the founder of the community known as Kehillah in East Bay.
Yeah.
He was a great lover of the Baal Shem Tov. He wrote this very short book on the Baal Shem Tov's teachings. It's called This Precious Moment, The Wisdom of the Baal Shem Tov. But he was working, his life's work was a book on the Baal Shem Tov. And it is coming out, it will be published posthumously. On November 23rd, they're having a book launch party, and we're co-sponsors. And I'll probably go, and I attended his funeral on Zoom, and it was just, and I had known him from years ago, so I considered him like a friend and mentor, and just his devotion to the Baal Shem Tov. It's like there's nothing more to which I could aspire than to live my life out like he did. So I hope you can look it up, and you can pre-order the book. It will come out in about a month. Okay, so moving right along, we've covered Zeitlin, Buber, Heschel, and now Shlomo Carlebach. Now, I don't know, Laura, do you want to say just a few words about your encounter with him? No? Okay. I'll show a clip from his early days, very charismatic. He came out of Chabad, and he was a big figure, a folk singer in the 60s, and became world renowned. And so this is a video of him singing to audiences that looked like they're thinking like, what the hell is this? And what kind of person is this? Like, they've never seen a Jew before. And he's like just so into it. And he's like singing these, and he wrote so many compositions. It's just really interesting to watch. So let me share my screen. Let me get back to Zoom. Here we go. Okay, I think that should do it. This might have been a Sunday. She's smiling though.
Great.
Wow. Okay, let's see if I can stop shared here. Okay.
By
So-
the way, he does a great version of the Nigun that we started with.
Oh yeah?
Yes, you should watch
Charles
that.
Karmelbach did the
Correct.
British ever Nigun?
Correct. I saw it on
Wow.
YouTube, and he starts basically the way we did, but then he goes into a really speedy version of it.
Let's call
And
it
it's
up.
really cute. No, well,
I'll
don't do
look
that
it up
now,
later.
but it's
Now,
really cute. Yeah.
You should all know that here on the coast side, you know what I'm going to say. We have somebody named Aryeh Coopersmith and his wife Wendy Burke. Aryeh encountered Shlomo probably not too long after this video was taken, when Shlomo came to San Francisco State University and was singing to college kids.
Right.
And he came upon this gathering, and Shlomo was singing, and he was just immediately like, wow, who is this guy? And he became like Shlomo's right-hand man. Whenever Shlomo came to San Francisco, he said, I'm here for you. I'm going to, do whatever you want. Shlomo had this vision of starting what was called the House of Love and Prayer, where all these young hippie Jews would come. And a lot, they came in the hundreds. And they had this beautiful, place where they'd sing and they'd do Shabbos together and they'd celebrate Jewish holidays. And Shlomo would come out from time to time and they'd host him. And so Aryeh spent years, and he pretty much had this House of Love and Prayer up and running. He was pretty much running it himself. And he became very involved in other organizations, other groups like the Korean Minyan, but then temple politics kind of got in the way, and he kind of got turned off to all of that stuff. So he does his own thing now. But he wrote this book about his life with Shlomo, Holy Beggars, A Journey from Hate Street to Jerusalem. And you can pass this around. You can see they were at this international or interfaith gathering.
Did this in the book, on our book club? We haven't, but we could.
I think we should.
Look at the picture on the
we
front,
should,
though. Look at the
absolutely.
picture. That was an
Right.
interfaith
Yeah.
gathering,
Yeah.
and Shlomo was at the center of it, and it had
Great.
all these hippies
Yeah.
from all different religions coming together in peace and song and joy. It was just what an incredible explosion of energy he brought to the 60s and 70s.
And the author's still here?
Yeah.
Alive?
Yeah,
Yes.
Lives in
He's
El
a
Granada.
member of CJC,
Yeah.
yeah.
and his wife too.
Oh,
Yeah.
really?
Very deeply spiritual people, profoundly influenced by Shlomo. So anyway, his
Meaning to reach
his influence just spans the world, really. And now what's unfortunate is that he had some boundary issues.
Yeah.
And he loved women and loved
Yeah.
hugging women, and sometimes got a little too huggy and especially with all these young hippies and kind of in the era of free love, you know.
Yeah.
So like a few decades later, these women came forward and said, you know what, you know, and now
Wasn't
with
so
this,
good.
yeah, it wasn't
Yeah.
so good. So a lot of communities banned. They said,
Right.
well, no, we're not going to sing any songs by Shlomo
Yeah.
anymore,
Yeah.
which is really sad.
Very sad.
And it really, you know, Aryeh was in the midst of the controversy
Right.
because, you know, a lot of people, I mean, it divided congregations.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, he was on one side defending Shlomo, and a lot of people were rightfully accusing him to say, no, that's not okay.
Wow.
So anyway, that
Rajneesh.
happens. Yeah, Rajneesh, and it's happened to a lot of other
Lots of
gurus and
others.
spiritual
They
teachers.
just
Right.
can't,
Any comments? Any comments or questions before we
But
move on?
you know.
I'd like to make a comment.
Yeah, Paul.
You know, a few times today, what's come up is why use prayer? Did prayer do any good? The students asked Zeitlin, you know, what are we doing? There's nothing we can do now when we know the end is coming. And he said, well, you can pray. And then the question is, well, what good is prayer? And then also, what's his name? Heschel was also talking about prayer. What is it? And one of us said, you know, what good is prayer if it doesn't do anything? You know, as though when you pray, you're asking for some magic to happen. In psychology, we talk about hope and grounded hope. And prayer is kind of like a formula or a template to allow you to focus your attention on hope. Grounded hope are the people we were talking about, you know, in Warsaw who actually did something. They took up arms. Some tried to communicate with the Nazis. You know, that's more of the grounded hope, you know, even though all else is going to fail, I'm going to keep trying to do this. I'm going to be thinking about this and maybe something good will happen out of it. In medicine, you know, when people get to the end of their life, cancer victims, sometimes all they have is hope. They don't expect that it's actually going to turn the corner for them and all of a sudden their disease will disappear. But hope is so important and it gives people a good purpose. It's also like the long distance runner. You know, if you're running to the end, when you cross the finish line, if you're looking around you and try to see who's behind you, who's in front of you, it's very different than focusing on the line and saying, I want to cross that line, I want to be first. And even if you're not, to stay focused like that will sometimes give you the impetus to run even harder and move forward more quickly. And it's all related. And I think what they're all saying about prayer is it's a formula or a template for hope and grounded hope. When all else fails, you have nothing else. If you keep thinking about the possibility of something working out, that does a lot for your spirit.
Mm-hmm. So true. Listen, we could have a long conversation about that. I want to see, in the interest of time, if you all want to hear a story, that might take. I might need to ask for 10 minutes, and then we'll have our follow-up session next week, and we'll try to cover the rest of the branches of Neo-Hasidism. And there's probably so much material that maybe if you want to follow up with a class or something else we can do together. There's so much here. So let me just take a moment to.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
Gary, can I just add just a little something about prayer that's been very helpful to me?
Please.
To try to get out of my childhood idea of prayer having magic to going to the.
Okay, I found this
Oh
on
my
the
God.
web for Can I Have a Little Something About Prayer? That's been very helpful.
My
to me.
phone is
Writing
talking
about
back
my
to me.
childhood
I'm
video.
sorry. And then going to the older extreme of having hope is that I've learned that there's a four pieces of prayer, and to start out this way is the first is I use the acronym ACTS, ACTS. First is adoration, Second is contrition. Third is thanksgiving. And then the last is supplication. So it encompasses more than just my idea of wanting something, but it's an all encompassing of what I would choose to call God and my communication with a higher power.
Nice.
Acts,
Thank you.
adoration, contrition, thanksgiving, and supplication.
Thank you, Jerry. That's a nice insight.
I think it's a very interesting topic for us to, not right now, but maybe down the road, is just to explore prayer. You know, what is prayer, and in its different interpretations, and what some of these, you know, some of these teachers and you know, have had to say about what is prayer, and you know, how to use it, and how to do it.
Yeah, and what Paul said was really, really meaningful to me.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. Also, I was watching one video of Reb Zalman talking about prayer. Really, it's on davening, which is prayer.
Right.
But apparently he did a whole series on it.
Dovenology.
Oh yeah, dovenology, right.
We want to hear your story, but
yeah,
people are.
Okay, well, here I go.
We're around the fireplace.
Okay. All right, just got to set the right
ambiance
ambiance here.
That's right.
Okay.
Around
All right,
the fireplace. Yeah.
So if you need to drop off the call, I understand. But I'm going to ask for 10 minutes, and I don't know, I might lose track of time. So bear with me, leave if you need to. All right, so this is a story about the Baal Shem Tov. This is a pretty typical story, actually. So there was once, he had many students, and they all felt they had a certain mission. And there was one particular student, I don't remember his name, but his mission was to tell stories. And he knew like dozens, maybe even hundreds of stories about the Baal Shem Tov. And after the Baal Shem Tov died, well, when he was on his deathbed, the student went to him and said, you know, I'll tell stories, but how will I know when I've accomplished my mission? I mean, you know, I'll tell stories for the rest of my life, but will there ever be a time when I know that then I've succeeded? And the Baal Shem Tov said, yes, you'll know. There will be a time when you know. So anyway, he went about his life, and he told many, many stories, you know, and he would travel from town to town. Now, it so happened in one town there was a man, almost like it was like a bishop or a very important man who lived in a house that was almost like a castle up on top of a hill, and he had put out this request that there was a Jewish story that he wanted to hear, and he was asking anyone, putting out the word, if anyone, he wanted to hear all the Jewish stories that anyone had to say, and he would listen and wait until he heard the story that there was one particular story that he was hoping that somebody knew. And people came for weeks, months, maybe years, and they regaled him with stories. They'd come into his house, he'd serve a nice dinner, and you know, they would, you know, talk, and he heard every story there was to hear, but he hadn't heard the story that he was waiting to hear. And this guy who was a storyteller got word that, yeah, he was looking, and he's, you know, and they said, oh, you for sure you should go see him, because I mean, if anybody would know the story he's looking for, you would certainly know it. So he made the connection. They went and brought him up in a carriage, and they invited him to stay for Shabbos. And so he was gonna, you know, tell, you know, some of the stories that he knew, and maybe he would get lucky, and it would be that he would know this one that this guy was looking for. Anyway, when he got there and he was invited in and they were having dinner, so the host said, so tell me, tell me a story about the Baal Shem Tov. This is your thing. Suddenly, all the stories he knew just vanished out of his head. He couldn't remember a single one. And his host was very gracious and said, okay, don't worry about it. We'll enjoy the dinner. And, afterwards, after you've been traveling all day, you're probably tired. So don't worry about it. After dinner, we'll sit and talk. And we'll have some aperitifs or something, and something will come to you. But nothing. And he was so embarrassed and humiliated that he said, I can't, it's Shabbos, I can't even leave, but, I'll stay till the morning, maybe I'll stay up all night and maybe think of something. And the next morning he had nothing to say. So, he just spent a very quiet Shabbos in his room and was just too embarrassed to come out. And after Shabbos was over, he left. And as he was leaving, as the carriage, guy was driving him down the hill, he remembered. There was at least one story he remembered. So he told the carriage driver to turn around. He went back up, and the host was surprised to see him, but he was very gracious, and he let him in. And so they sat down, and he started to tell this story. He said, I don't know why this happened and why this story came to me, but when I was with the Baal Shem Tov one night, one afternoon actually, he decided we have to go. We have to go to this town. It's about 20 miles away. And it was already late. And he got a few of his students, and I was, 4 students. I was one of them. And, jump in the carriage, let's go. And this happened a lot. They didn't know where they're going. In fact, when they found out where they're going, they said, are you sure you want to go there? Because it was known to be a very anti-Semitic town, almost a city. And he insisted there was somebody there he had to talk to. So they went, they got there, it was just evening, and they had, sent ahead to a guy, a Jew that they knew in an alley, and they were able to find shelter, and they stayed with him overnight. And the next day, the guy who's telling the story said, he sent me into the center of town to go fetch this guy. I forget what his name was, but he was supposed to be a very important man. So he went in with the carriage driver, who was their driver, and found that there was this big conference going on in the center of town, and it was like a Catholic something, and there was a lot of speakers, and there was kind of an anti-Semitic vibe there. And here he was, obviously a poor Jew, and went to find this guy who turned out to be one of the people. He was seated on this dais. He was a very important person, like a cardinal or something. And so he went up to him and said, oh my God, this guy, he's so poor, this guy's so important, he's going to come with me? He said, the Baal Shem Tov said, go and get this guy, I want to talk to him. So he says, listen, my teacher sent me to find you, and he says he needs to talk to you. And surprisingly, the guy said, okay. He got up and he walked off the dais and followed him and went in the coach and went back to see the Baal Shem Tov. And they walked in, he greeted the Baal Shem Tov greeted him. Apparently they didn't seem to know each other, and they went back into the back room. And they were talking for about 2 hours, and the students were sitting out at this table, thinking, what the hell is going on? How does he know this guy? Why did this guy come to see him? What are they talking about? Not a clue. After 2 hours, the door opens, they come out. The Baal Shem Tov says, okay, you can go ahead and take him back to his house. And he drove him back and dropped him off, and that was it. And then they went home, and nothing was ever spoken about it after that. And that's the end of my story. Well, at least that's what he said to this guy. Right. He said, I don't know why that happened, what that was about. It happened like 20 years ago now. And I don't know why I'm remembering that, but that's the one story I have to tell you. And he looked at his host, and his host was actually crying. It makes me emotional too. And he said, "That's the story." And the student was very confused, like, what kind of story is that? Why would you be asking to hear that story? He said, because I was that person. So you see, I was a cardinal in that town, but I was, nearing my retirement, and I was not very happy, and I hadn't been feeling very happy for a very long time, even though I was a very important man in the Catholic Church. And I didn't know why, and I didn't, but I was praying to try to understand, why I was feeling the way I did. And you came to me just at the right time, when I must have been ready. And when I met your teacher, he knew my parents had died in a pogrom. And that he knew that I had been adopted. I was Jewish. I was adopted by a Catholic family and raised as a Catholic. And for somehow I excelled in schooling. In my school, I was like one of the top students. I didn't know why. And my parents, certainly weren't all that bright. But I worked my way up in the church and became a cardinal. But I still I didn't even know that I was Jewish. But I didn't know why. I just wasn't in sync with the Catholic Church and all the anti-Semitism. Anyway, I retired right after that and came here and have lived a quiet life and studying Jewish, lore. And but I never knew who that guy was.
Wait a minute.
And for years, I never, the guy who came to get me and to talk to his students, his teacher, who his teacher was, he knew me and he knew that I was Jewish, but I didn't know who he was.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And I've wondered now for the last 20 years. And so you came and you finally came to enlighten me, to tell me who that was and who you were. And so this is what is meant by like a tikkun, or repair, like on a spiritual level, like in somebody's soul. And so a very important tikkun was effected then. And it was then that the storyteller knew that he had achieved his mission.
Man. Yeah. Very nice.
Anyway, the story goes on, but and there are many more like it, but that tells you something about the Baal Shem Tov.
Yeah.
So thanks everybody. To be continued. I'll send you a follow-up email with some of these links, and we'll go from there.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Great, thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Laura, did Steve ever come in the waiting room? Laura? Oh,
Was somebody in the waiting room?
I don't know. I was just asking her. So good night. Thank you very much. It was lovely.
Okay. All right. Good night. Okay. All right, guys. I'm going to end the Zoom session, okay? Okay.